Thank you, everyone. We're going to move on to our next session, which will look at how behavioral science can help global brands optimize cultural nuances. And I'm going to hand over on screen. We're being joined by Julian Buckeridge, who's head of Smarter at Hill & Knowlton Strategies Thailand, and Jules Norton-Seltzer, who's the corporate relations director for Diageo Moët Hennessy Thailand. So Julian and Jules, over to you.
Well, terrific. Thank you so much, Arun, for inviting us to join. We're honoured to be here at the Provoke Asia Pacific Summit 2021. And I think it's really interesting to note to start that while behavioural science is still an emerging concept in our region, it's actually underpinned Hill & Knowlton's blend of strategy and creative for the better part of a decade now to create that long-lasting impact for our clients. And I think it's really important that this exercise starts being incorporated into Asia Pacific because it does create a real effect for clients. And so in today's session, I, alongside my colleague Jules from Diageo Thailand, we're going to explore the value of leveraging these behavioural drivers. So how people think, how they act, how they make decisions, as well as share how targeted but globally applicable processes can be layered into marketing and communications planning in that way to help reduce the guesswork, to optimize cultural nuances, and really to create that locally relevant message that drives effective change. And I think on this point, I'll bring in Jules, I'll bring you in here because I believe cultural relevancy plays a big role in both the strategies and the execution for Diageo's global visions. And how does that play a role in advocating change during this really interesting period of time?
Thanks, Julian. Good to see you all. Well, I can't actually see anyone, but I know there's people there. So good to be invited, and thanks for today. I guess the point around global versus local, I mean, I think probably a similar framework to many other businesses is we have a very clear global framework, which I'll explain, but I guess the magic is in the local execution of that and understanding the cultural norms that we're seeking to firstly understand and then shift. So, I think even before COVID, everyone was very clear and understood that, performance and purpose must come together. That's what our customers tell us, that's what our consumers tell us, that's what investors tell us. So, we'd already planned and announced our society agenda. So it's basically a 10-year action plan around creating an inclusive and sustainable world. So there's three pillars, basically. One is promoting positive drinking. So that's through kind of moderation messages through brands like Johnny Walker, as well as set campaigns that we'll come and talk about. Two is inclusion and diversity, skills and hospitality training, progressive portrayal and advertising, gender, I&D in our value chain. And then three is around pioneering grain to glass sustainability, particularly around net zero carbon and reducing waste and using less water. So I guess just wanted to kind of put that framework, because that's the global framework. And then we have the freedom within the framework. And I think that's, what we'll come on to talk to today. So what we've used is that structure, those pillars, but particularly focusing on today, number one, so promoting positive drinking, and looking at what's most relevant to kind of consumers, stakeholders, and customers in Thailand. And I guess just kind of overlaying with that, there's quite a lot of cultural factors at play. If you look at alcohol consumption in Thailand, it's relatively high compared to APAC, but you've got a very young population, very high mobile penetration, but also balanced with quite a traditional Buddhist religious norms. So you're kind of putting all of that together and all those factors to try and articulate and understand, the best campaigning strategy forward. So I guess I'll pause there, Julian, if you want to come in on anything.
Because I think you raise a key point here in Thailand that it is becoming a much more dynamic market. And I think it would be interesting to get your thoughts on what is actually making the market landscape across Asia Pacific more dynamic now.
Yeah, so I guess, my experience, I've been in the UK and then Australia and New Zealand and now Thailand. So one thing is, there are a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences. And while I guess some of these themes might be familiar, but just picking out 3 or 4 from my perspective. So one is, I guess, is obviously social engagement. You know, people are more engaged now, whether through choice or through force, actually. You know, I think the nature of the world, government regulations changing every minute, means people have to keep up to date in a way that they didn't used to or didn't expect to. So public engagement is one. 2 is the amount of messengers. So I think it's pretty common effect globally around the influence of influencers and key opinion leaders. What I've noticed in Thailand is actually the power of those groups is even more significant than, say, Australia, where I was before. And you know, particular KOLs and influencers in particular regions. So you're getting down to kind of almost a geo specific KOL strategy. So that's one comment around the messengers, and also understanding that nuance, like I mentioned before, around alcohol consumption, behaviors and habits. Not only are they quite different to other Western markets, but they're also quite different in different parts of the country. You know, what works in Bangkok is very different to what they call upcountry in Thailand. So the countryside in the north of Thailand. And then just, you know, a couple of final themes. I think treating corporate affairs campaigns like brand campaigns, and this is something that I'm learning myself in corporate relations as a discipline. You know, I think we're now utilizing greater data, greater metrics and KPIs, and basically treating what we're going to talk about today, which is Drink IQ, as a brand. You know, everything we're doing is like how we would treat Johnny Walker or Tanqueray, and having that level of discipline and focus around our insights to kind of hopefully drive success. And then just lastly, you know, that point around insights versus perception, and I think it's a theme we'll probably cover quite a lot today, because, you know, really understanding what those insights are, and how different they are in, like I said, in different markets or even within different parts of the same country. You know, where a shock and awe tactic, which is traditionally how public health messaging has resonated, might not work, and looking more at peer-driven norms that are more effective and actually leading to the behavior change you want.
And this is, I think, a really important point to note here, is the fact that now insight-driven communications has become so important to understanding those cultural nuances, because now we have to reflect how people really behave and make their decisions. It's rather than the assumptions that we sometimes make on how we think they should. And a relevant example for that, which is outside of Asia Pacific, in Europe, was our wheel swap project that we performed with Ford, who really wanted to create that real behavioural change in ensuring that motorists as well as cyclists actually would safely share the road together. And so our Smarter team actually conducted extensive research there and found empathy was the key emotional driver in the UK and Western Europe for creating that behavioural change. And that underpinned the creative execution of the campaign. So they actually did an empathy-driven experience through VR, which put people and gave them the experience to understand what it was like from the other side. And the results of that was quite significant. So participants were 70% more empathetic and 60% more likely to change their behaviour after going through that experience. But when we applied the exact same research practices here in Thailand, we found that the behaviour, as Jules said, was more strongly impacted by social and peer-driven pressures and norms, and not empathy. And what that really highlighted to us was the basic insights show the target profile is the same, the channels to reach them are the same, but this is why businesses need to look beyond that base level to identify the culturally relevant hooks for their messaging. So I want to come back to Diageo in Thailand now and talk about the Drink IQ quiz. And it was actually from Diageo's side that they wanted to incorporate the behavioural interventions in this local campaign. So what was the decision making? Why did you think it would benefit you here?
So yeah, thanks. So Drink IQ, just for background, is a quiz, an interactive quiz, which is focusing on kind of giving people information around alcohol. So it's a global tool we have at Diageo. However, what we wanted to do in Thailand was find a clever way to utilize it and find an impactful way. So the motivation was really around, one, try something different to what's been done before, two, have a tangible impact, and three, kind of be creative and also positive as well, which I think is an important point. So just kind of taking a couple of those things in turn, what's been done before. Like I mentioned before, Thailand has relatively high alcohol consumption, has traditionally had, stronger sort of issues around drink driving. So there's been a lot of campaigns in Thailand, public health campaigns, and all with the right intent. However, it was strange, I guess we found that there wasn't that much research about the effectiveness of previous campaigns or genuine insights into, drinker behavior and triggers for drinkers. So, a lot of work, but we wanted to see, can we do something different? Impact. This is, I guess, a core point, and kind of coming back to what I said at the beginning. We don't want to just be doing CSR for the sake of CSR. The whole point of this 10-year strategy is to make a tangible difference. We don't want to just come into a market and pat ourselves on the back because we've done a campaign. It's really, the objective is driving behavioral change. Our goal is around kind of people drinking better rather than more, and that's the core thread of our business. So how do we actually deliver on that goal and do it in a tangible way? And then just lastly, around creativity and positivity. So I mentioned the quiz format. It's an interactive 10-question quiz. It's educative, but also kind of lighthearted. Provides you facts, tells you about the effect of drinking. So it's delivering all the messages you want, but just in a way that's different to, I think, what's been done in the past. And it also then links to the cultural piece that we'll talk about. So, we know people are online, we know people are competitive, they like quizzes, and they are influenced by influencers. So, you're linking that objective with, the right channel and the right insight, hopefully. And just lastly, around, not stigmatization. The whole way we've gone about this is to help people understand, to actually encourage them to share it. Again, a bit like a brand, and have fun. And if we were, those were the kind of factors that led us to kind of move forward with the project. And then I guess just kind of moving on from that, I think if you can, Julian, if you can just kind of talk a bit more about the process you guys led us through at H&K, particularly the kind of behavioral insights piece.
Of course. So for us at the Smarter team, it was such an exciting project because, as you mentioned, in Thailand, this type of research hadn't been done before. So we were actually uncovering insights that, despite the fact there had been decades of campaigns in public health, they had not actually seen whether or not their communications were effective. And so for us, we actually pulled together drinkers and non-drinkers to survey them, to understand the preconceptions towards drinking, those primary channels of exposure to alcohol, as well as their buying habits and the effectiveness of those previous campaigns. But then further on to actually understand behaviourally how we could get people to consider both joining the challenge of this Drink IQ quiz, changing their behaviour, and also sharing it to other people. We ran a message testing simulation with all of those participants to determine what would be the most effective message pillars that would actually engage them. And through this research, it was so interesting that the most powerful message pillars to create this change were something that we talked about before, was that social norms, so the unwritten rules of how people should behave in society. But then as well as that was game framing, so actually being able to phrase our messages that described a positive outcome of their choices. And these weren't estimated guesses. We could actually see it very explicitly in the results. There was a clear discrepancy in the percentage points in how effective they were to create that consideration. And so they acted as the foundation for our communications across the entire campaign. And that included educative illustrations and comic strips, as well as that high profile challenge that was driven by the research-driven and selected KOLs and influencers. So we knew that these would be the right messengers to actually challenge consumers to achieve that perfect score on the quiz, and also become a leader in their own right by sharing it with their friends. And then following the campaign, we went one step further by following up with those participants to understand if we had created behavioural change. And we found post-completion that 98% of the participants said they intended to drink better for others, and over 90% would recommend the quiz to others. So I guess, Jules, I'll ask you, what surprised you or perhaps encouraged you about this campaign?
I think everything you just said, basically. I think the stats tell the story. So, you know, obviously we had the insights to give us confidence that it was the right strategy. But put it this way, I wasn't anticipating we'd be in the top 3 trending hashtags in Thailand, you know, just before Christmas. That was beyond expectation. So good job on that. And you know, the number of completions. So, you know, like I said earlier, we have very clear targets on this. So, you know, globally, you know, completing this Drink IQ quiz, but specifically in Thailand, you know, we want to reach 250,000 Thai consumers by 2030. So, you know, each year that's sort of quite a big number. And our target for the first year of this, i.e. last year, was 25,000, and we got to over 30,000. And as well as the kind of the breadth of the audience, you know, the amount of people that were engaged in it, you know, there was a kind of a pledge that people were doing. They sort of put their hand to their heart, and you know, I actually saw this all over Twitter, people all doing this pledge. So it just showed, you know, a genuine impact. And then, you know, I guess in terms of like what's encouraging, it's around well, the opposite of trusting your instinct, trusting the insights and trusting the process, and just making a kind of an actual difference to what we want to achieve. You know, I would like to see us not just achieve those numbers by 2030, but show a demonstrative impact on alcohol trends and alcohol consumption in Thailand, and to be able to play a part in that, you know, that would be a powerful thing.
And I think for us at Hill and Knowlton, we were so encouraged by the results as well. And I think for the brands and the marketers listening here at Provoke, it also illustrated how easy it is to efficiently integrate this thinking into any phase of the communications process, whether it's conceptual, determining the messaging, visuals, distribution timing, etc. And it's just simply by leveraging the research, whether existing or newly commissioned, and seeing it through a new lens provided by behavioural experts. And I think for us as an agency side, with the idea of always having to be in beta and seeing over the last 5 years, last year seeing almost 5 years worth of transformation condensed to months because of COVID, is the need to continually innovate and continually bring in the thinking which reduces that insight. So then perhaps, Jules, I'll pass it over to you for the final thoughts. Is building on Drink IQ, what do you believe you have learned about behavioural thinking, and what do you think those conversations look like going forward for corporate affairs?
Yeah, look, I think it's a similar perspective to before. You know, the data-driven benchmark for every campaign we do that's the kind of standard now, and the expectation on ourselves. So, for example, towards the end of this calendar year or early 2022, we're going to be launching as Diageo a kind of an interactive e-module on educating consumers around the dangers of drink driving. You know, and really it's about making sure we've got these insights to drive our thinking. While that's already launched in other countries in the world, you know, I think it's going to be quite different on the basis of the data we already know from Drink IQ. So I think that's, you know, one thing. And then just kind of secondly, you know, how we use these Drink IQ platforms and align it with the wider business. So we use Drink IQ in partnership, for example, with hospitality as we move towards the reopening, hopefully, of bars and restaurants. It's using these insights to help people and encourage consumers to kind of behave in the new normal. So working with our customers, you know, working with our brand teams to drive the message so much more holistically. So this becomes a kind of all-encompassing approach, not just a kind of corporate affairs agenda. So that's kind of what we're looking at going forward.
Well,
any final words from you?
Oh, well, I think as clearly seen in our partnership with yourself, it's the idea that companies can still define their own narrative And the fact of, instead of putting your finger up in the air and making a guess, is the behavioral thinking can actually help instigate that integrated approach that identifies the right messengers, and that timing to really strategically support companies and clients' purpose. And I hope that's the key takeaway that people will take from our session. So thank you all so much. I'll pass it back to you, Arun.
Thanks a lot. Cheers for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Julian and Jules, we can clap. They won't hear us. Doesn't matter. It's good to clap.